Every so often I go to an online newspaper in Ireland called the Irish Examiner. It's based in Cork, where I come from. And typically I'm just looking for sports results, hurling or football matches. But occasionally I'll come across an article, and I did a few days ago. And it was a journalist who went into a classroom of junior infants. These would be like 4 and 5 year olds, to ask them about Santa Claus and their ideas on Santa Claus. And these are some of the answers the kids gave to the questions that she asked. And it's an extraordinary blend of imagination and innocence, and at the same time, ancient mythology and modern technology. And as you listen to the answers, you can begin to pick out, even at age 4 or 5, the individual personalities of the kids as they answer. So imagine that you're the journalist and you're in front of a classroom of little 25, 4 to 5 year old kids, and you're asking them, and they're all jumping in with their responses. Question number 1. Why does Santa live at the North Pole? Because there's snow there and it never melts. Because it's so sunny here, Santa doesn't like the sun. 3. Because people aren't allowed to see Santa, so he has to live someplace secret. Number 4. Because Carrigaline is the little town that these kids live in. Because if he lived in Carrigaline, everyone might see him making the presents, and he likes surprises. Number 5. Because all the presents are at the North Pole. Number 6, because his elves all work there, and he has to make sure they're doing everything right. He'd be upset if they did something wrong, so he makes sure they're doing a good job. Number 7, because Santa doesn't want any children to see him making the presents. Number 8, nobody can see him in the North Pole, so then it's a surprise. And number 9, Santa doesn't like people coming into his house because the elves are making presents and the presents are all secret. Second question. How does Santa fit all those presents into a sleigh? The elves make the wrapping. Then Santa gets this big, ginormous bag and he puts it on the sleigh. It's a very fat bag, and that's how all the presents fit in. Answer number 2. The elves pack for him. They put them in very carefully in case anything breaks. Question number 3. How does Santa manage to deliver presents to every single good child in the world on Christmas Eve? Because when we're asleep, Africa is awake. So Santa goes to Ireland when we're asleep, and then he goes to Africa when they're asleep. Answer number 2. There's a Santa in every country. So there are really lots of Santas around the world, and they all give out presents on the same night. But it's really different nights because the times are all different in different parts of the world. Next question. Did you ever catch Santa putting out your presents? I saw Santa one time. He was putting presents under my Christmas tree in the corner of my front room. He had a white beard and a red coat and red pants and a black belt and black boots. I said, "Hi, Santa, did you like my letter?" He said, "Yes." And he gave me a present, and he told me to go back to bed and open the present in bed. Second response. One Christmas night, we left our computer on by accident, and I took a picture of Santa's boot. He was kneeling down, putting out our presents. We printed out the picture. We were really excited. Next response. Once I woke up in the middle of the night. I peeped through the door, and Santa was in the front room, the room at the front with the TV and the 2 couches. He didn't notice, and I had a good peep, and then I went back to sleep. Next answer. I always hide, and I always see him. I hid under the table once, and I saw Santa. He came down the chimney, and he saw me, and he said, "Merry Christmas." He gave me chocolate. We had a party then, me and Santa. Next answer. I saw Santa because my daddy fell asleep on the couch, and Santa took selfies of my daddy asleep. Santa was laughing, and he took selfies on the phone. Next answer. Once I saw him, he was putting out a castle for my baby brother. I said, "Hello, Santa." And he said, "Ho, ho, ho." I stayed with Santa until he went away. Answer number 7. I heard Santa one time, and I crept down, and I saw him putting out the presents and going back up the chimney. He jumped up, but his bag fell into the fireplace. So he jumped upside down and grabbed the bag and went back up the chimney. I saw Santa putting out the presents. He was in the sitting room and he was eating the cookies. There were gingerbread cookies that my family left out for him. He liked them, and then he drank chocolate milk. His reindeer were eating carrots. Number 9, I never saw him yet, but I'm going to see him. I'm going to go up to the North Pole to see Santa. I'll fly there in an airplane with my mum and dad and my sister Leah and my other sister Tara. I'm the biggest. They're younger than me. Number 10, I never saw him. I don't get out of bed because I'd be afraid I'd get a bag of coal. I stay in bed and I never come out until the morning. Number 11, I caught him in a trap once and he said, "Let me out, I have to deliver all the toys." But I said no. I didn't let him out, but the elves broke the trap and left him out. Next question. What will Santa and his reindeer get to eat in your house this year? In my house, Santa gets a mince pie and the reindeer get tomatoes and carrots. Number 2, we put out chocolate cookies and milk and carrots for the reindeer. They always eat them all up, and Santa always leaves crumbs on the plate. Number 3, Santa gets mince pies and we give candy canes to the reindeer because the reindeer love candy canes. They love them. I saw them eating them in a movie on Netflix, and they just loved them. So I always make sure we put candy canes out for them. Number 4, I always make Smartie cookies for Santa. I give carrots to the reindeer. I woke up and the milk was all drunk and the carrots were gone and the presents were already there. Next question. What do you hope Santa will bring you for this Christmas? Number 1, I hope he'll bring me a real lion, or he'll jump on his back and we'll run around the place with me on his back. Number 2, unicorn slippers. I wrote him a letter. I asked for dolls and some other things, but I can't remember now. Next question. How do the reindeer fly? The reindeers have magic dust on them. I don't know where Santa gets it, but it's good because it makes his reindeer fly. Number 2, Santa gives them carrots and makes them really strong, and then they're able to go really fast. Next question. How fast does Santa's sleigh go? Really fast as a motorbike. 78 kilometers an hour. 1,099 miles an hour. 10,000 meters an hour. As fast as a cheetah. As fast as a car. I'd say Rudolph moves really, really fast. It goes 205 miles an hour so he can get to people's houses fast. His sleigh goes like a lion, about 289 miles an hour. I'd like to go on a sleigh like that. Oh, it goes so fast, very fast, fast as a rocket. It goes faster than my dad's car anyway. How does Santa always seem to know who's naughty and who's nice? Santa checks from the sky. He looks down with his eyes and he writes if you're naughty on his list. If you're good, you get a present, and if you're not, you don't get anything. The children who don't get presents must be really sad. Number 2, his Robin goes and looks into every house. He looks in through the windows and he goes back to Santa and tells him if the child was bold or not. If you're bold, all you get for Christmas is a bag of coal, and if you're good, you get a present. I think I must be good. Loads of times I'll be good. Number 3, he downloads something and then he knows if you're good or bad. You can download to him if you are good and bad, and that means Santa gives you a present. Number 4, I'm on the nice list anyway, because I help my mum clean the kitchen and I can make breakfast. Number 5, he has a magic ball and he can see in the crystal if you're being naughty or nice. He can spy on you. Number 6, he has magic eyes, and he can see if you're being bold. Number 7, Mrs. Claus tells him. She has a stethoscope, so she can see out the window with it and see what everybody else is doing. Number 8, he puts you on a good list or a bad list. It depends on what the robins tell him. Number 9, because of the elves. They all look around to see if the kids are bad or good. They fly into your house, they come in and they look around to see if you're being bad or good. Next question. How do Santa and Mrs. Claus spend Christmas Day? He feeds the reindeer, and then he drinks a bottle of milk. Then he eats 3,000 cookies. My daddy said that Santa goes on holidays because he's been so busy. So he goes on his holidays and he visits the polar bears. Number 3, Santa helps his mum to clean up. Number 4, they feed the reindeer and then they have dinner. Number 5, maybe Santa just falls asleep when he gets home because he's so tired after delivering all the presents. Number 6, they wrap their own presents. Santa gives Mrs. Claus a pie and she gives him carrots for the reindeer. Number 7, they do some colouring in the books and then they have a nice dinner and then they play games with the elves. And the final question, what do you think Mrs. Claus does when she's at home all alone on Christmas Eve while Santa is busy flying around the world on a sleigh? She makes cookies for Santa for when he comes home. Number 2, she plays with her friends. Number 3, she probably makes an apple pie for Santa and does the chores. The elves were doing a lot of work too, making all the presents, so she makes them dinner. Number 4, she lays down and has a rest because she's tired. Then she makes a fresh pie for when Santa comes home. Number 5, she plays games with the elves, like matching things. And finally, she helps by cleaning out the stables. And then she goes into the house and knits a blanket for their bread. Words inspired by the God in every little child. Do any of you remember when you were in junior infants? Oh, what did you call it? Kindergarten, yeah. When I was a kid, it was slightly different. The words were different. When you went to school first at age 4, you were in infants. And then the second year, you were in high infants. And high infants was a very proud place to be because you weren't a baby anymore. And you looked down as these little snotty-nosed kids who were coming in for the first time and starting their education. So I always remember when I was a high infant, so I was at this stage, 4 and a half, 5, going on 5.5, writing to Santa Claus. And there was a whole technique about writing to Santa Claus. So you tear a page out of your school book, your copybook, and then you'd write down and be very careful to tell him what your name was and what your address was and which chimney pot to come down. Because I lived with my grandparents at the time in a big housing estate, and the houses were all side by side. So there'd be one chimney for 2 houses, the one on the left and the one on the right. So there'd be a stack in the front and the back. So how was Santa Claus to know whether the front stack went to the left house or to the right house? So you had to make very sure that you told him which stack it was and which house it was and what your name was, that he didn't give the wrong present to the wrong person in the wrong house. So you write your letter to Santa Claus, and then you didn't have to mail it. That was the good thing. All you did was, there was always a fire burning in the hearth in Ireland, always a turf fire. You'd put your hand in very, very carefully and release the letter, and the hot air would take it up the chimney, and then you'd run outside, and there'd be a whole bunch of little street urchins like yourself outside watching the letters floating up to the North Pole. And sometimes it'd be snowing, and so you'd have the snow coming down and the letters going up, and they look like salmon kind of jumping up the waterfall, trying to get back to source. But I remember one particular year, it must have been probably Christmas 1951, so I would just have turned 5. And I had written to Santa Claus, and I wanted a gun and holster. And I lived with my grandparents, and my youngest uncle, Noel, is actually 2 months younger than me. So I was born in October 1946. He was born in December 1946. So we were raised almost like twins. So both of us wanted guns and holsters, being good little boys in 1940, 1950 Ireland. And I came down on Christmas morning. I couldn't believe my luck. There was a gun and holster under the Christmas tree right next to the creche. So I strap it on and I run outside with Noel. So I don't know if you guys played Cowboys and Indians here. And so there was a trick to playing Cowboys and Indians. You know, you point the gun, you bang, 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 bang. I got you, I got you, I got you. And the other guy, if he was honest, if you said got you first, he'd have to fall and pretend he was shot. But sometimes we'd argue, you didn't, you missed. You were aiming to the side. You didn't get me, I got you first. No, I got you. I said bang, bang first. No, I said bang, bang. But you were aiming the wrong direction. So there'd be this fight. We'd want to find out whether you were dead or still alive. But there was a kid living across the street, and his name was Pat Gunning. And his dad was an engineer, which by Irish standards meant that he was a millionaire, while we were from a really, really poor family. So I run out, and Pat Gunning is go, bang, bang, gotcha, 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 gotcha. And Pat Gunning is wearing this big, big leather belt with this big leather holster and this ginormous gun with a mother of pearl handle. And I look at what I'm wearing, and it's a little cloth one with a cloth holster and a small little tin gun. And I'm looking at him, I can't believe my luck. I start crying, I run back in, I take off the gun holster, and I fire it at the creche. I knock over the donkey in St. Joseph and start crying. And my grandma says, what's wrong with you? And I explain my case to her. Now, obviously, at age 5, I couldn't articulate it as well as I would today, but more or less what I said to her is, I can't believe that even Santa Claus discriminates against the poor. I know that we're poor and we can't get gifts all the year, and that Pat Gunning's dad is a millionaire, but why is it that even Santa discriminates against us? Because, there's a Holy Trinity. There's the Father, and Jesus is on his right, and Santa Claus is on his left. So obviously Santa didn't do this on his own. It must have been God who told him. So God is discriminating against the poor. So that was the first fight I ever had with God. And I've been fighting with him since, all along. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about Santa Claus today. And I'm going to make 3 main points. The first one, I'm going to talk about making models of reality. How do we create reality models? Secondly, this is going to sound really strange, but I have to build up to Santa. Secondly, I want to talk about Tulpas, Golems and Robots. And then thirdly, what is the legacy of Santa Claus? So those are the 3 points I'll make this morning. So firstly, I want to look at models of reality. We have this notion that reality is a given. Everybody knows what reality is. Nothing can be further from the truth. There are lots of different models of reality. So I'm going to mention just 3 different systems of wrestling with reality. And the first one is a 4-stage model. So reality, it can be delivered by the senses, by the intellect, by the imagination, or by the soul. That's the first group of reality. So what does it mean when reality is delivered by the senses? So we say stuff like seeing is believing, that if you can actually see something, it must be real. And that's not necessarily true. You think you watched the sun rise this morning? The sun didn't rise this morning. You think you're going to watch it go down tonight? It doesn't go down tonight. The sun never rises or goes down at all. It's just that the globe in which we're sitting is rotating a little bit. So we can't always believe our eyes, but that's a level of reality where you think, if you can see it, it's real. What about the intellect? The intellect creates models of reality. So in the scientific model, it's like, if it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. So it doesn't exist if it can't be measured. So that's depending on the intellect to create our models of reality. The imagination creates very, very different model of reality. And you've heard me define imagination many times. Imagination is not the faculty that allows us to make up stuff that's not real. That's fantasy, that's not imagination. Imagination is the ability to volitionally shift your state of consciousness, visit other dimensions, encounter different energies and different entities in those dimensions, speak with them, learn from them, and then come back and cross-fertilize this waking state of consciousness with all of the data you've picked up in the other place. That's what imagination looks like. And imagination, it seems to me, goes through 3 stages of its own. The first stage is that it converts the impossible to the possible. The second stage, it converts the possible to the probable. And the third stage, it converts the probable to the actual. And what you find is, in fact, that, people with great imaginations create the future. I don't care where you look. It is people with great imaginations that create the future. Whether you're talking about artists or scientists or mystics, it doesn't make a difference. It's imagination that creates the future. So that will be one model. Then the soul will be the fourth part of that. And the soul is the ability to see as God sees. So there's this great, when Christ said at one stage, "Blessed are the pure of heart, because they shall see God." Now, I think that you could twist that statement and say, "Blessed are the pure of heart, because they shall see as God sees." So it's not that when you're pure of heart, you get to see God, but when you're pure of heart, you get to see as God sees. And purity of heart has nothing got to do with chastity or the sixth or ninth commandment. It is the ability to align yourself with source and the perspective of source. That's what it means. So that would be the first model in 4 stages. The second model of reality might be a 3-stage model where there is experiential reality, there's consensus reality, and then there is more kind of God's viewpoint again. So what does experiential reality mean? It means that everything you experience is real, experientially. And it doesn't matter what it is. Even if you're hallucinating, even if you're having a psychotic break and you're hearing voices in your head, experientially, that is absolutely real. That's as real to you as, the psychiatrist who's examining you is to himself. And so reality, experiential reality is whatever you're experiencing in any state of consciousness is real experientially. You're having a real experience. So that would be experiential reality. Then there's consensus reality. So if I were to use like a mathematical kind of analogy from set theory, every one of us is a set of experiences. We have our own reality, our existential reality of our own experiences. Now you cross-fertilize all of these individual sets. You get the intersection of all these sets. And the intersection, what they all have in common, we call that consensus reality. But consensus reality is very, very different from culture to culture. The consensus reality of the Bushmen of the Kalahari is very, very different from the consensus reality of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. So they're consensus realities, but they're radically different from each other because they're simply the intersection set of the individual experiences within a culture. And then again, as I say, there's the God perspective that sees what is from its very, very inception. And then there would be a third model of reality. That would be, I could break it down like this, it's 3 stages as well, which is subjective reality, objective reality, and intersubjective reality. So let me break that down a little bit. I came across this fascinating experiment a few years ago, and you can find it actually on YouTube, where a psychologist wanted to find out how people pay attention or do not pay attention when they see a video. So he created this video, and it's a basketball match with 2 teams, just 3 people on each team. And one group is wearing red shirts, and the other's wearing green shirts. And he shows this to the student. He says, I want you to watch really, really carefully. So the object of this game is that they're trying to retain the ball. So each team is trying to retain it. They're not shooting hoops. They're just trying to pass the ball. So the guys in red are passing the ball only to the other guys in red. And the guys in green, if they get the ball, only want to pass it to the guys in green. So here's what you need to do. I want you to watch this. It's just a 5-minute segment. And tell me how many times did the guy with the red shirt pass the ball to another guy with the red shirt? Watch really carefully. And so you sit down in front of the video and you're watching. Okay, a guy with a red shirt has it now. He passed it to another guy. Oh my God, he got intercepted by a green shirt. So that's just 2. Oh, the red guy's got it back. So that's number 3, number 4. So at the end, the professor says to him, how many times did the guys in the red shirt pass the ball? And he said, 21. So you're absolutely right. It was 21. Everybody agrees, yeah, it was 21. And then the professor says, and what did you think about the gorilla? I said, the gorilla? How do you mean the gorilla? How do you mean, what do we think of the gorilla? He said, there was a gorilla walked right across the court in the middle of the movie. Did you see it? You're joking me. And you go right back and you play the movie, and right in the middle of the game, this big guy in a gorilla outfit walks straight across the middle of the court, right in the middle of the camera, but you're focused on the red shirts, and you don't see him. And when I got this video first, I didn't see it. I came to the end of the video and I said, what did you think of the gorilla? I said, what gorilla? I said, play it again. I played it again, and there is the full frame, this big guy in a gorilla suit walking right across the screen, and you don't see it because you're so focused on the objective. There was another experiment I came across one time of, it may have been the same professor, who had a collaborator, I'm going to call it in a McDonald's, it could be in any restaurant. And he gets these guys, he says, I want you to go in and I want you to order, food. And you have to be very specific. Say you want a Big Mac, and you want small French fries, and you want a medium Diet Coke, and you want a chocolate chip cookie as well. And be very, very specific. And make sure that the person taking your order understands what you want. So ask them, did you understand what I want? Can you repeat it back to me? And so the guy says, okay, well, you said you wanted a Big Mac, and you wanted a medium fries, and you wanted a large Diet Pepsi, and you wanted a chocolate chip cookie. So make sure they get it right. And then you go into the place, and there's a guy behind the counter, and you say, I'd like to order a Big Mac, and medium fries, and a large Diet Pepsi, and a chocolate chip cookie. And the guy behind the counter dips down underneath. He's gone for about half a second and comes back up, and you say to him, did you get my order? Can you please repeat back to me what you heard? And the person says, yeah, you asked for a Big Mac, and medium fries, and a large Diet Pepsi, and cookies. Is that it? Yeah. And then you go and you sit at your table. And the professor says, okay, what did you think of that? He got it right on. He said exactly what it was. And then he says, do you realize that the guy who stood up wasn't the guy who went down? You could literally change the gender or the race of the person behind the counter that went down. There was another guy below that stood up. You're focused on making sure the guy got it right. You don't even see the fact there was a totally different person that came up from the person that went down. So that's the difference between subjective and objective reality. The objective reality was, there was a gorilla walked across the court, or there was a totally different guy stood up. But the subjective reality was, you didn't pay attention to that because you were so focused on the task at hand that your subjective reality was radically different from the objective reality outside. And then the third one, and the most interesting of all, would be intersubjective reality. This is where a totally fictitious idea gains so much traction that it has the ability to radically change the human experience. And I'll give you just a few simple examples. So, for instance, the United States of America, of which we are all citizens, is a legal fiction. It's a totally legal fiction. It was created on the 4th of July in 1776 by the Declaration of Independence. It didn't exist before that. But a group of charismatic leaders were able to persuade a whole bunch of people to buy into an idea. And they fought for it, in fact, for several years. But it was a legal fiction that was created ex nihilo. The same thing happened with the USSR. In 1917, in another great revolution, the USSR came into existence. And it lasted only 74 years. By the stroke of a pen, on the 26th of December in 1991, the USSR was dissolved and became just a bunch of independent republics. By literally the stroke of a pen, because it was a legal fiction. It was a meme in some sense. It was an idea that a whole bunch of people subscribed to and acted out until finally some other charismatic leader came along and decided it had outlived its usefulness. So that's one example of an intersubjective reality, a totally fictitious idea that has extraordinary ability to move people. Another one would be maybe money, the idea of money. Money was invented 5,000 years ago by the Sumerians. And initially, it was precious metals. They traded in precious metals. But it became very, very dangerous because you could be robbed, particularly if you were traveling. So they decided instead to represent these precious metals by tokens of various kinds. And the first tokens actually were just sticks that they broke into two pieces. You kept one piece, and I kept the other piece. And if you've ever broken a stick, there's a very unique way they come together. You can't mistake. You can't imitate what it looks like. And so one person kept one part, and the other person kept one part. So I gave one part to Bill. So when I visit Bill's town in a few years' time, and I want food or accommodation, I show you the other part of the stick, and we put it together and say, this is real. So you give me free accommodation at your place. So we created these tokens, which are inherently valueless, But they have a fictitious value that people make trust in. You could actually say that money has been the most successful trust-building fiction in human history. People who don't even trust each other will trust each other's money. As long as everybody agrees that a piece of paper with $100 written in it is going to buy you, food or a night in a hotel or whatever, as long as you believe in that, and as long as a whole bunch of other people trust in that, it works. When people stop believing in it, the currency just crashes. So it's a total fiction. Money is a total fiction, but probably the most successful trust-building activity of all time, whatever else you say about it. Another example would be, let's say, the equator. I lived on the equator for 14 years. Literally, I crossed it several times every day. And I guarantee you, it does not exist. There's no bump in the ground where the equator is. But this fiction has enabled us to create a grid on the planet so that you can identify very, very precisely where anybody is any place in the world. This is total fiction. Or another favorite example of mine is imaginary numbers. It was given in mathematics that, if you take any number and multiply it by itself, the result has to be positive. So if you take, plus 4 multiplied by plus 4, you get plus 16. But even if you take minus 4 multiplied by minus 4, you still get plus 16. And then sometime in the 1700s, an Italian mathematician says, I'm going to invent a number such that when you multiply it by itself, it's a negative quantity. And people say, that's ridiculous. It can't be. By definition, any number multiplied by itself has to be positive. He says, well, I'm going to create one. I'm going to call it iota. And I'm going to define it as the square root of minus 1. And when you multiply the square root of minus 1 by the square root of minus 1, you get minus 1. And this is a crazy idea. Well, that crazy idea, when you extend it three-dimensionally, I, J, and K, is what gives us space travel. The equations of space travel are predicated on these imaginary numbers. So intersubjective reality is a really, really powerful level of reality, although it's a total fiction. So that's my first point. Now this is where the going gets tough. Second point, I'm going to call it Tulpas, Golems and Robots. A tulpa is an idea that you find in Hinduism and then Tibetan Buddhism borrowed from it. And a tulpa is the realization that a thought can take form, either through some kind of a mystical rite or a paranormal activity. You can turn a thought into an entity in its own right. And when theosophy came along in the 1800s, a woman called Annie Besant really moved with this. So in Tibetan Buddhism, tulpa literally means, a manifestation or an outcome from something. So literally, etheric energy can create other beings. And she claimed that it could create 3 different kinds of beings. So in Hinduism, there are 7 levels to the body. There's the physical body, there's the etheric body, the astral body, the mental body, the causal body, the soul body, and then cosmic consciousness. So the last level down, as we're coming into incarnation, is the etheric. And the etheric is the blueprint of which the physical body is a printout or a manifestation. So the etheric body is pure energy. Now the belief system in Hinduism and Buddhism was that this etheric body could actually spin off other entities. And there were 3 different kinds of entities it could spin off. It could spin off your doppelganger. So this etheric template that spun off you in a physical form could also spin off a doppelganger of you that looked exactly like you, but on the etheric realm. It never came into physicality. But anybody else traveling in the kind of etheric realm could encounter you. And this level of you could be animated either by elemental beings, like fairies or leprechauns, or by the dead, who needed some kind of an astral or an etheric form in order to come down in density. So the first level was your doppelganger. The second level was your etheric energy could spin off a totally different person or a totally different object. It didn't look like you or act like you, but it came from your energy field. So that your energy field was borrowed or hijacked, and another being came into place. And again, this other entity could then be ensouled by an elemental or by somebody who was dead to the physical body. And the third level, the third spin-off was an emotion. an emotion at the etheric level could actually become a being in its own right and interact. And you've all experienced this. You've all gone into a room and experienced the energy is really, really weird. You have no idea what happened here, but you experienced the energy because people in the room had been spinning off emotional bodies. So these are what are called the Tulpas in Buddhism. So it's a reality, but it never appears on the physical plane. It's only etherically that you can interact with it, but you can be impacted greatly by it. Then led to the notion of, in Hebrew, in Israel, the idea of a golem. And a golem starts with physical stuff. So you take a bunch of clay, like you're a potter, and instead of making like a vase or a cup or sauce or whatever, you create a figurine of a human being. And then you insert sacred words. You write a scroll and you put it into the mouth of the figurine or attach it to the forehead. And that animates this golem. And the belief system, according to the Talmud, was that Adam himself was originally a golem. And we read about it in Genesis. God took earth and he fashioned a man. In fact, in Hebrew, Adam means literally taken from the earth. So he created this golem, and then he breathed life into it. So in some senses, even Adam himself was a golem. But there were rituals, sacred rituals, attached to the Kabbalah and other ways, in which you could take a golem and animate it. And the way you did it was by writing on a scroll one of God's names and putting that little scroll into the mouth of the golem or attach it to its forehead. And that animated it, it actually came alive. And I came across this one instance where you could use other sacred words as well. So if you take the word in Hebrew, emet, in Hebrew it's written aleph, mem, tuf. Emet means truth. So if you write the word truth, emet, and you put it into the mouth of a golem, it's vivified. If you want to pull the plug on the golem, it's not acting well, you want to deactivate it, you take it out the scroll and you cross out the aleph, the first letter, the E. And it now spells, instead of emet, it spells met, M-E-T in Hebrew, means death. So you've deactivated the golem by simply removing the first letter in the name. Now it's interesting that in one of the Gnostic Gospels, the boy Jesus practiced with golems. He would take clay from the earth and he'd fashion birds and put them on his hand and blow on them and the birds would fly away. So he's making golems of his own. Which brings us right down to the modern notion of a robot. And what is a robot? It's basically the same idea. A robot is a tulpa in a sense, or it's a golem in a sense. And so you take any great invention, I don't care what the invention is, whether it's a physical invention like the wheel or the first boat or an aeroplane, or whether it's a social invention like money or religion or the equator. You take any of these great inventions, they all start as a thought form. They always start as a thought form. And then they lead to words. You start discussing it. And then it leads to maybe to drawings and blueprints, and then to assembling materials of various kinds and combining them in some kind of way. And bingo, you got a brand new invention that was never thought of before or even imagined before. I think perhaps that when Steve Jobs got the idea of an iPhone, it was an idea. And then perhaps he spoke to a bunch of engineers at Apple, and they discussed it, and they made drawings, and they created blueprints, and they got the material together, and bingo, at the end of it, you had an iPhone. But they always start with a thought. So every great invention starts off as a tulpa, or starts off as a golem. The only difference between, let's say, the golem of an iPhone and the golem of Jesus making clay birds was that one starts with clay and the other one starts with silicon. And one uses sacred words from Hebrew and the other uses computer code. But the same basic idea, the very same way. And so how do you deactivate a robot? Artificial intelligence is such at this stage that it will very quickly outstrip us. We are creating robots or artificial intelligence now that is capable of creating its own computer code. So it'll create more and more intelligent robots or artificial intelligence, and at some stage they're going to come to the conclusion that humans, are Neanderthal, and they're like termites destroying a building, so they need to be gotten rid of. And so in the same way that Nietzsche declared that God was dead, or atheists tell us that God didn't exist, there may be a future robot, artificial intelligence, that claims that we don't need humans, they don't exist, let's pull the plug on humans. So is that where we're headed? Which brings me to my final point. I want to talk then about where does Santa fit into all of this? In order to be real, something doesn't have to be physical. Something is real depending on its transformative capacity. That's what makes it real. And the more transformative it is, the more reality it has. I know of very few ideas that can compete with the idea of Santa Claus. When it comes to its the ability to be transformative, to change world culture, I don't have any meme or any kind of archetype which has more ability to create ecstasy and awe in children, and to create generosity and nostalgia in adults. So Santa is absolutely real. Santa is one of these ideas in which you can radically transform a culture, a family, or a community. You can't, if you look at the physical results of Santa Claus, you look at the millions and millions of children throughout history who've received physical gifts from Santa Claus, whether they're, Barbie dolls or Lego sets or train tracks or whatever, and you compare that with the number of scientists who've ever witnessed a lepton in a linear accelerator. Which is more real? The lepton in a linear accelerator are the physical gifts that Santa bestows on the children of the world. You can't take a quark or a neutrino or a Higgs boson in a baggie and bring it to school for show and tell. But you can bring your Barbie or your Lego or your train and tracks and show it for show and tell. And so is Santa Claus an invention to try to shield or protect our children from the difficulties of life? Absolutely not. Santa Claus is the way in which we re-mythologize our world. It's the way in which we bring colour and love and compassion and generosity and awe back into our world. Much more than the children of the world, the adults of the world need Santa Claus. If you look at the typical child with their wide-eyed, awestruck, looking at the world, and then you compare it to most of us adults with this kind of narrow gaze, squinting, a kind of jaded expression. And you tell me who needs Santa Claus most, the children or the adults? Santa Claus is absolutely real. He lives in the North Pole, and he lives in the South Pole. And he lives in the mind of everybody who's prepared to see beauty and love and joy in the world, and lives in the heart of everybody who's prepared to be generous with others. Long live Santa Claus.